What's going on, everybody? Jack here, back with another review, and today I'm going to be talking about the brand new Marvel/Sony movie Morbius, starring Jared Leto and directed by Daniel Espinosa. Morbius is about a man with a terminal illness who tries to find a cure using bats, and when the cure goes wrong, he becomes Morbius, the living vampire. So as many of you watching will know, Morbius really got a big panning among the critics. And while I wouldn't say it's totally undeserved, I didn't think it was as bad as I had heard. Starting off with the cast of Morbius, Jared Leto is a fine Morbius. He's not really that stellar, he's not all that interesting per se, but he's fine. I don't think there's anything very wrong with his performance. I just don't think he brings anything super interesting or charismatic to the table in Morbius. And Matt Smith, who plays the villain in Morbius, he's fine too. I don't think anyone in this movie is awful. Just no one brings anything that interesting to the table. There are some scenes where Matt Smith's performance isn't great, but I honestly think it's more because of bad writing, and not necessarily because he did bad. Just the cast overall feels somewhat uninspired and somewhat uninteresting to me. Now, I was expecting a total train wreck with Morbius, and, honestly, Act 1, as plot goes, was pretty solid. It wasn't bad. It definitely wasn't great, it definitely wasn't groundbreaking, but it was interesting and it was pretty good. Act 2 followed a similar thing. I think Act 1 was a little better. Act 2 definitely was a little bit more cliched, but I think that Act 1 and 2 were decent. Then getting into Act 3, it totally goes off the rails. A lot of things make no sense. The plot is totally incoherent, and it just dives into total mayhem. I know I can't go into spoilers, but nothing really makes sense in Act 3. The action overall in Morbius is actually pretty decent. I think as it goes, the first action sequence the movie has is a lot more solid than what it goes into. Over the movie's action sequences, each one is progressively worse, so you start out with a competent action sequence, and by the end, it is not good. Especially because in Act 3, when there's a big villain fight, CGI fight, you really can't see at all what's going on. There was a solid 10 seconds where it was literally debris flying everywhere, and I couldn't tell literally if the characters were even in the frame. The action became totally incoherent towards the end, but early on, the action was actually pretty competent and pretty interesting. Overall, I think the movie feels quite rushed. I think that there are a lot of plot points and relationships that just don't work because I don't think they've been earned in the movie. I think this movie runs hour 40 minutes with credits, and I think it really could have been more like 2 hours and 10 minutes because there are a lot of things that sort of happen in the movie that I'm like, what? Like, it just wasn't earned. It didn't have any setup towards a relationship or anything like that. There was a lot of times where I felt like the movie was trying to give like an emotional punch, and we really didn't see enough of the backstory to really care. Personally, I didn't think Morbius was awful. It just felt kind of boring and uninspired. Even the opening titles felt like something that a young After Effects student with 6 months of experience could have made no problem. It just felt really uninspired, kind of drolled out. I heard that Morbius was going to be very boring. I didn't find that. It was entertaining. However, it just feels like it didn't really have anything new to bring to the table and nothing very interesting. As many people have said, Morbius probably should have been R, as I would argue Venom also should have been. I definitely understand they're trying to appeal to the PG-13 audience, but Morbius is a vampire. Like, there are definitely times in the movie where there's some stuff that should have been quite bloody, and it's just, he slashes someone and then they just kind of fall to the ground with no blood and kind of nothing happening. And while in Venom it was kind of more okay because he's more kind of like flinging people around, I mean here he's like a blood-sucking vampire, so he should be violent. I get where they're coming from with the PG-13 rating, but I definitely think that Morbius should have been R if it were the best movie it could have been. And on that note, I also think that Morbius is too much of a hero in here. I mean, Morbius is supposed to be a Spider-Man villain, not a Spider-Man anti-hero, and I think he's too much of a good guy here. And I understand, you kind of want to make a protagonist, but I've seen many movies where a protagonist is also a villainous, bad person. And I think going down that route instead of trying to make him sort of the good guy would have been much more interesting and much more true to the character. But the pacing in the movie, it's just totally off. Sometimes there are very long stretches of things I don't feel really needed, and then there's other scenes that have voiceover over them and it feels like they're cut really rapidly to get a shorter runtime. The movie ends completely out of nowhere. It does not have a good ending or a satisfying ending. In fact, I would argue it really doesn't have an ending. It just kind of stops and then has credits. And Morbius's arc as a whole over the story just makes no sense. Sometimes he feels like an anti-hero, sometimes he feels like a hero, sometimes he feels like a villain, and I never really get what his motivation is or what's driving him throughout the movie. And the same goes for the villain of the movie. There's absolutely no reason why the villain would be doing the things he's doing because of why he says he's doing them. Both of their characters really just don't make sense. They don't have drivers that an actual human would be driven by, and they just don't make sense. And as you may have heard, the director of the movie actually spoiled the post-credit scene of Morbius before the movie even came out. So I think Sony knew this was somewhat gonna be, not a flop, but not necessarily very good. And so they kind of they had a review embargo that lifted only a day before the movie released, so people couldn't see how much of a panning it was getting. Sony clearly wasn't very confident in this movie, and it shows. The post-credit scenes really don't make any sense, and the way they try to tie it into other movies just doesn't work. It totally goes against logic they've set up in other parts of the universe. And while the writing in Morbius overall is pretty bland, expositional overall, the post-credit scenes really have awful writing, and you'll see what I mean when you see the movie. I think a good way to describe Morbius is one scene that the movie has. There is a dance scene in Morbius. That is not a joke. There is a dance scene in Morbius. The villain struts around, does a little jig, in the middle of the movie. There's music in the background, and he's just boogieing. Like, it's the new Tobey Maguire in Spider-Man 3. It's so weird and out of place, and it was the most interesting part of the movie. It was the most funny part of the movie, but it was completely out of place, completely weird. This entire movie is just like one weird dance scene that doesn't know where it's going. The movie isn't awful as I had heard, it's just stunningly mediocre. The movie doesn't excel anywhere, and it does do some things pretty badly too. There are a few cool ideas in Act 3 that if they had done right, could have been really interesting, but they don't do anything with them. I think of Morbius as a little bit similar to Rise of Skywalker. While I was watching, I only noticed a few problems, but when I actually started to go back and think about it, the movie fell apart completely. But Morbius overall was pretty entertaining. It was a decent popcorn movie. I talked about a lot of issues with Morbius, but only a few of them stuck out to me actually while I was watching. It was only more in retrospect that I realized a lot of the problems that the movie had. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that the last movie Sony released, Venom 2 Let There Be Carnage, I absolutely hated. It was awful. and I think Morbius is better than that. I think Morbius actually was an improvement on Venom Let There Be Carnage, even though it's very mediocre, you're not going to remember it, and it has a lot of problems with it. I didn't find it annoying while I was watching. On a scale of -5 to +5, I'm going to give Morbius a 0. So what did you think of Morbius? Let me know in the comment section down below. It having a 16% on Rotten Tomatoes, I was expecting it to be a worse movie, and it was just okay. I mean, it wasn't abominable like I thought it might be. Better than Venom 2. And yeah, it wasn't too bad. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. This channel is still small and I'm really trying to grow it to reach a bigger audience, so I would really appreciate it if you did that if you enjoyed the content. And yeah, have a great day. See you later. Bye.